Hybrid Cloud Show, episode 21. I'm Aaron.
I'm Gary.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Shane.
Welcome to the show about public cloud, private cloud, and everything in between. Our views here are ours and not those of our employers. It's a new year, and I think now is a perfect time for us to reflect both on what we have seen in the last year and also to look to this year and what we expect to be the significant developments in the public cloud, private cloud, and everything in between.
One of the coolest things I've seen in the last year is actually the Azure Hybrid solution. That ease of taking the cloud and extending it into your data center. So whereas before things like that existed, it was quite difficult to go and set up Azure Arc, or in the AWS world, you'd have to go and get an outpost at great expense and complexity, or run something like EKS Anywhere to bridge those components. It now seems like those things have started to get a lot easier, certainly in the Azure world. And I think that that's really good, because I've always dreamt of this consistent model for deploying things, even at the infrastructure level. Yeah, we've always had Kubernetes as a consistent way of deploying workloads, but a consistent way of managing, deploying infrastructure, that single pane of glass. And it feels like it's going to start to become a reality now, which I think is really good.
How do you feel about the control plane being cloud-based versus having stands local first?
I think I'm okay with the control plane being cloud-based, because at some point I want a centralized place to control things like IAM that we've spoken about at great length before. I want all of my users to be in one place. I want all of my APIs to be in one place and be one set of APIs that I'm targeting that are standardized to deploy things. So I'm okay with that. And actually, I think even in really heavily regulated industries that I've worked in the past, they're okay with that. I guess data sovereignty is always the main concern around running those hybrid workloads. So if I can take those pieces of the workload that need to be data sovereign, or maybe even need big levels of compute that I can't run in the cloud in an affordable way, then yeah, I think I'm happy to make that trade-off. I think I'm fine with control plane in the cloud workloads wherever I need them. And I'll just standardize on whatever control plane allows me to do that, be it AWS, be it Azure, be it something else.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had that down as one of the things that I'm expecting more of next year is more of a move from the cloud players into the data centers and more offerings like that. So I agree with you. It's a significant development from this year just gone. Maybe it was obvious in retrospect, but I didn't exactly expect it to be from the clouds that we were going to see this ease of hybrid offering from data center into clouds. I think a lot of people talked about hybrid cloud as going the other way round, that you would have your data center thing that expanded out into the clouds and bursted into the clouds. And in fact, it actually seems quite logical once you've solved problems like your IAM and all these other bits in the cloud, that you would extend it back that way into your data center.
Well, a lot of businesses already have their workloads in the cloud, right? And they're now finding that the cloud is either too expensive, or they don't quite need the scale of the cloud, or they've got a workload which they're not allowed to run in the cloud. So I think if they're already there, and we know that there is a large untapped market, but actually there are a huge number of workloads that are already in the cloud and investments that have already been made there, then yeah, why not go the other way? I guess the thing with the workloads that you had on-prem that might burst into the cloud is that you were really looking at that on a workload level. You were talking about, how do I orchestrate those applications? You weren't worrying about standardized VM manager across the cloud and on-premises, for example. You were just worried about, I've got a Kubernetes cluster. Can I extend that into the cloud, or can I run Kubernetes on-prem and in the cloud? Whereas actually what we're looking at now is, I can write some Terraform. I want a VM. Here's how I template that in Azure, and I'm just changing the region or the availability zone that runs in, and that could be on-prem, and it doesn't matter as far as the cloud provider is concerned. I'm just targeting their API. So I really, really like it. I think we're probably going to see a lot of copycats or a lot of innovation from the other cloud providers in that direction too.
I'm very excited about that. I always thought that it would be the opposite way around, because that's how I think Rancher started, that it's a local control plane that can extend out to the cloud. And I did not think the clouds would get to the point where they actually cared about extending into your on-premises footprint. So very exciting.
And they have cared about it for a while, I guess, because we've had things like Azure Arc on one end of the scale and AWS Outposts on the other end of the scale.
Anthos,
things like that. But they've always been really tricky to deploy and manage. Like an Outpost in particular, you've got someone coming from AWS to audit your data center and work out have you got enough power and cooling and how are you going to connect back? Do you have a direct connect circuit in place already? All of those kind of things that really make it quite high friction to deploy. If I could just have a USB stick that I plugged into a PowerEdge box that deployed a quote-unquote outpost for me, which is kind of what this Azure thing is, then
right,
that really, really eases the adoption for those regulated markets or those people who need or want to run workloads on-prem.
Right. We're not focusing on, like you said, a workload deployment. This is an infrastructure deployment, a platform deployment. And I think that's the difference and why it makes me so excited. So looking back, I think the biggest thing for me was all the disruption caused by the VMware licensing changes. Technically, that started in 2023, November 2023, but the ramifications weren't really felt until licensing agreements started being changed this year. And all of a sudden, everyone had to abandon ship for X, Y, or Z reason. And in the process of doing so, I was really curious how things would shake out in the private cloud market. You know, who would we see take the place, take the reins? And the answer was everybody and nobody. And I really wasn't expecting that. I really expected like Citrix or somebody to come in and kind of take that place. But no, it's OpenStack coming to fill in some on-prem places. It's a lot of people moving their VMs to just straight cloud. And the ease and the tools that have been created in the past year to be able to kind of shift those workloads has actually been really powerful. And even in doing so, we see a lot of community support coming in to fill these gaps, a lot of open source projects. And that's what makes me most excited for the future. Because like we talked about last episode, Red Hat donated a bunch of projects and the CNCF has a bunch of new technologies that I think can really build a very powerful future that can be an alternative to just, you know, standard Docker and Kubernetes application deployment structure. And that gets me really excited. I think we're going to see a lot of innovation in this front. I don't think it's going to be quick. I don't think we're going to see like something happen this year. It's going to be a catalyst or anything like that. Nothing big announcement. But I do think we're going to see a lot of progress forward. And I'm excited for what we're going to have in maybe 2-3 years.
Is that a case for like betting on popular technologies? So if they do the license rug pull, that a load of smart people from the community who are also in the same sticky situation are like, let's come up with something to get out of here?
Well, I mean, you look at the latest release of Proxmox that came out at the tail end of last year that has the we'll import your VMware VM almost seamlessly inside it. That's a not community project, but certainly a FOSS-friendly project that has really stepped in to fill that gap. Like Sean said, things like KubeVirt being a little bit more mature now, that's another way that you could potentially fill that gap. It does feel like we're going in a direction where the generally accepted norm is that you have to migrate off of VMware. The clock's ticking, and there are a bunch of smart people working on tooling around that actually is getting pretty good pretty quickly. I do also wonder if it's going to be, I know you said, Sean, you don't think it'll be a catalyst year, but I do wonder if people's minds are slowly going to start to shift about how they orchestrate and run some of these workloads. I was talking about the Azure local stuff, and that, I guess, ties in nicely with this. Are there going to be a bunch of people that are Microsoft customers that are also VMware customers that just say, you know what, screw this. I'm just going to go full in on Azure as my control plane and run the VMs on the hardware I've already got. I'm just going to Azure Site Recover them onto my Azure local boxes.
Absolutely. I think that's an absolutely valid play. I think a lot of people who, because like you said, Gary, most people are already using the cloud in some form or capacity. And I think they're going to try to move their VMs there as quickly as possible. And for the ones that for X, Y, or Z reason can't be moved, there are other solutions. You can run VMware Engine on GCP or on AWS or whatever else, and you could run your workloads on that in the meantime. But I think Gary's right. I think the mentality is abandon ship, and it's just looking for the most cost-effective way to spend down.
I could absolutely see myself in a previous life using that migration pattern of empty out a server that's running VMware, put Azure local on it, and site recover the VMs on it using the Azure native tooling, because it's effectively zero cost to me, right? I already have Azure. I'm already going to spin down those VMware machines. I can just move the VMs onto the tin I've already got in my data center. It makes perfect sense.
I really don't see a downside. This Azure local stuff is really cool. I'm excited. That's what it's for, right? The elasticity to go into the cloud for your VMs for temporarily while you need it and then come back down to your local. That's awesome.
The elasticity to go into your own data center when your cloud bill gets too large.
Boom. Look at that.
We've come full circle.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
So my reflection looking back on the last year is and it's on platform engineering, which shouldn't be any surprise, is that it's still maturing, still growing. People are very excited by it, but I think it's now matured to the point where people think it kind of might suck, which I think is a good sign. There's been 2 reports that have come out. One is Google's DORA report. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's the DevOps Research and Assessment Report. It's also got something called DORA metrics, which are ways to measure basically productivity of software engineering teams. And this report that came out recently talks about how AI and platform engineering are sort of what's the term they use? They're falling short, I believe. They've created loads of organizations, gotten loads of information back, and essentially it's saying like those rewards you're meant to have reaped from platform engineering aren't really happening. A lot of companies are very new to this, I think, and a lot of companies are still figuring out how to do platform engineering. And I think what I'm seeing is teams have developed inside companies and they're very like opsy focused. And what platform engineering really needs is a product mindset. So I think things like platform as a product looking forward are going to become like far bigger. I think product management and product owners are going to become skill sets in platform teams that need to happen for these things to be successful. I think the companies that are doing platform engineering really well are doing really, really well. But I think for the majority of companies, they're actually not. And they're just sort of rehashing a lot of old kind of problematic behaviors where you're just developing a system in isolation, not talking to your customers. So I think there's a lot more maturing for platform engineering as a whole to do. So I'm not like completely dismissive of it as I am with AI, but that's my looking back and looking forward.
So what are those changes going to look like?
If you think about it, let's say you're a software engineering company, you will have like UI designers thinking about like maybe the front end of your product. You'll have product owners and product managers who are defining the direction and vision of that product. I think those skills need to be folded into the platform engineering teams, and you need to be looking inwards at your organization saying like, who's talking to the customers, which are our engineers, who's designing this interface, who's got a consistent vision for this platform? Because at the moment, like a lot of it's cobbled together scripts and like, you're looking at different technologies. Oh, Backstage looks cool. Let's plunk a service catalog in there. Who needs it? We don't know. Let's just do it because it looks cool and might get us some budget. I think that needs to mature because that's what the reports seem to be saying. There was a 2024 state of platform engineering as well. That's also talked about this too. Like it's not product people driving an internal product. It's sort of hacking together some scripts, getting some together, getting some buy-in and iterating on that. But I think it needs more serious investment and a more mature conversation about like how your company should be doing platform engineering.
Yeah, I think it's always been this interesting trade-off in platform engineering, right, between being very prescriptive about the way that we build platforms and often not balancing that with what I would have historically termed as developer experience. So what do our developers actually need in order to build a successful product on top of our platform? So I've seen it before, for example, where companies have gone all in on Kubernetes and they've said to developers, hey, our platform is based and built on top of Kubernetes. And developers come back 2-3 years later and say, well, we want to build an event-driven workload and we want to use Lambda and EventBridge or some kind of message queuing. And often Kubernetes doesn't lend itself particularly well to that kind of workload, or certainly doesn't lend itself well to doing that kind of thing in a cost-effective way or a resource-efficient way. You probably do at that point want to be looking at serverless or something like that. So like you say, Shane, it's an interesting place because we've historically not had a platform product owner, for example. But what I'm starting to see now is companies say, all right, well, we have this platform or we have this set of standards that we expect our engineers to build against, but no one is owning that standard. And they are starting to recruit for these platform product owners or platform product manager type roles because they are seeing that as important as something they would build for an end customer.
I think it's fair to say it's just an early stage for the industry. Like most companies, I think Surveyed had platform engineering in their organization for only about 2 years. So I think we're all learning together a bit that these skills are needed and you can't just depend on a group of engineers in a room trying to figure this all out for themselves. So I'm excited. It should be good. I think this will be a positive change. I definitely still maintain my optimism and belief that platform engineering is the way to go. I think it's just we all need to upskill a bit more.
As it becomes more of a product or a serious discipline within these companies, do you expect more third-party offerings in this space or more generic platform engineering solutions that can be reused by platform engineering teams and companies?
I think so. So companies are going to have their own differentiator, the things that they only do or care about that might need that platform engineer, where you can't just take something completely off the shelf and just roll with it. But I do think there's like a gap between pile of shell scripts or just a Kubernetes installation and what a platform engineering team needs. So there's probably going to be more frameworks, more like IDPs, so internal developer platforms, where you might get some off-the-shelf tool that does a lot of heavy lifting and then you customize that enough for what you need. There's tons of opportunity in this space. Like if Gartner's saying that 80% of companies are going to have a platform engineering team in the next 2 years, then it seems like it's rife for some companies to make a lot of money.
So I'm going to say something that you're all going to love. And I just feel like we couldn't get to the end of 2024 in cloud without talking about AI. And we have seen so much of it this year in every single guise. And whether people agree with it or not, I think there's no doubt that it has been an extremely significant impact on the public cloud space, at least in 2024. So I'm going to say that with the additional proviso that I think maybe in 2025 some of the hype might come off, maybe, and instead we start to see some of the more reserved applications, I think, of the AI stack. I would be interested to see how when things like these sort of built-in NPUs and things like that finally make their way into the equivalent of things like Plex servers in people's houses, what interesting things people might be doing with those, and whether, things like self-hosted models are going to be a thing that is both not an energy sink and are useful enough for people to, I don't know, search the 60,000 emails I've got in my email inbox and actually tell me something useful when I need to know what the answer is, or whether this is all just going to be something that we look back on and laugh.
Yeah, I'm really hopeful that we start to mature our thinking a little bit around AI and don't just throw it at everything and see what sticks. I would like to see those real-world consumer use cases really flesh out first, and I think that's going to give other smaller businesses some ideas on how they might implement this. So I'm actually quite interested in a lot of the stuff that Apple is doing around AI, where I can open my inbox and just see a quick summarization of the emails, or it can slightly more accurately predict which ones may or may not be important to me. I think that stuff is quite a nice use case. I still have a lot of concerns around the sustainability piece, though, and I think that's, I guess, what you're getting at, Aaron, is that not only in our use cases do we need to mature, but we also need to be realistic about what can be done on things that are either local or not large bare metal cloud servers with Tesla GPUs in.
When you say sustainability, do you mean like sustainable environment or sustainable investment or?
I was thinking from an environment power usage perspective, but now you mention it, it's also, I guess, got to be sustainable from a maintainability point of view and everything else. So I think overall, just a more mature view on the way that we view AI, responsible use of it, and everything else. I think 2025 will be the year that starts to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the last episode, it was one of my topics on KubeCon that like the marketing still, if you look at the show notes for everything, it's going to be AI. But the conversations happening on the ground are like not as AI heavy, which makes people are realizing that the utility of it isn't as loud as the marketing material implies. I think marketing will eventually catch up to that, but it just takes a bit of time.
LLMs, I'm not even going to call them AI. It's not AI. Their large language models are good at a couple tasks, one of them being summarization. They're great for that. I personally have been doing a lot of building my own models and fine-tuning them and trying to see what application I can get for my local development, for my house and like my self-hosted setup. So I can do things like talk to my Home Assistant with my natural voice instead of having to use very specific words in a very specific order. That kind of stuff, interpretation of language and intent, again, a very strong suit for an LLM. But there's not a lot there right now. And like you guys have all said, it's very expensive. So what I foresee happening is going to be a lot of smaller, not as expensive models being used for things like on-prem, like or on your phone, right? Something it's not 8 billion, maybe like 1 billion that can actually be run on a feasible like phone. And then I expect agentic control. So having like one model orchestrate and pass the intent off to more specialized, smaller models that can actually do something, give back a result, and then it can evaluate and say, okay, now I need to pass this over to this person or this model or hit an API over here. I think that's how it's all going to come together and how we're going to achieve some semblance of sustainability, because having one 500 billion parameter model that can only run on a nuclear power plant by one company is just never going to work.
Well, and hopefully if those get smaller, maybe there's a chance for some of the open source models with actual open data and all of that kind of stuff to at least get to a level where if you wanted to use those as an alternative, they made some sense. I think I've talked about it before, but I have started using a speech-to-text on my phone to write a whole lot of my messages, and it runs locally and it performs very well. And that's only a little model, but it's a model that I use many times a day just to talk to my phone instead of keying everything in. Part of that is because I have a very terrible open source keyboard on my Android phone, and so trying to write anything on it is pretty horrendous. But it is a good speech to text application or model on that phone. And so I do think there is some scope there, within bounds for some of this stuff to improve and be a bit more local, be a bit more open source, and maybe that's a step in the right direction. There's been a lot of resistance, I think, in the open source community to a lot of the AI developments or LLM developments or any of these things that you talk about because of those bigger picture issues. And so maybe 2025, when the hype dies off a little bit, there'll be a little bit more of the sort of aggressive free software zealots who start to step into places they haven't been before.
I hope so.
Well, that's probably a good place for us to wind it up. Happy New Year, everybody, once again, and thanks to our existing PayPal supporters and patrons. If you'd like to join those people, you can at hybridcloudshow.com/support, where for various amounts on Patreon, you can get either an ad-free feed of just this show or all the Late Line Linux family shows, and sometimes you receive episodes early. If you have questions or feedback, please send them to show@hybridcloudshow.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Until then, I've been Aaron.
I've been Gary.
I have been Sean.
And I've been Shane.
See you later.